A millionaire arrives at the hotel with his new girlfriend and freezes when he sees his pregnant ex-wife working at the hotel as a chambermaid. When he tries to talk to her, her response leaves him in shock. What happens next reveals a devastating past and the fight for redemption that could change everything. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on more heartwarming stories like this, and like the video to keep following. The sky was heavy, foreshadowing a storm that seemed to reflect the confusion inside Raphael Montero. The 36-year-old entrepreneur had a solid reputation in the business world, but his personal life was marked by absences and choices that took him away from important things, and even more important people. Next to him, Bruna, a young 24-year-old model, laughed as she adjusted her lipstick in the car mirror. "You're going to love this place, Rafa," she said nonchalantly, as he parked the car in front of the luxurious Grand Imperial Resort. "It's perfect for relaxing after your busy week." Raphael forced a smile. "I'm sure it'll be great." As they entered the hotel, they were greeted with all the pomp characteristic of the place. The grandiose architecture, with marble everywhere and chandeliers that looked like hanging jewels, reinforced the exclusivity of the environment. Raphael felt slightly uncomfortable, as if he was about to discover something that would change the course of his life. The suite reserved for them was spacious and elegantly decorated. Bruna ran out onto the balcony, enchanted by the panoramic view of the sea, while Raphael absent-mindedly checked his cell phone. It was then that he heard the sound of the door being unlocked. "Excuse me, I'm here to tidy up." The woman's voice echoed through the room, soft but laden with tiredness. Raphael looked up from the phone and froze. At the door stood Lara, his ex-wife. Shock washed over him when he noticed her belly, round and unmistakably pregnant. Lara also stopped in mid-motion. For a second, the silence in the suite was so absolute that the sound of the wind outside seemed distant. "Lara!" Raphael's voice came out in a whisper, incredulous. She blinked, as if trying to process the scene before her. He, her ex-husband, standing in a luxurious bedroom while she stood there pushing a cleaning trolley. Her expression quickly turned from surprise to a mixture of coldness and anger. "Good afternoon, Mr. Montero," she replied formally, trying to ignore the knot forming in her throat. "I can come back later." "Wait." Raphael took a step towards her, ignoring Bruna, who was watching the scene without understanding anything. "What's going on here? Are you pregnant?" "It's none of your business," said Lara, tightening her grip on the trolley. "Excuse me." She tried to leave, but Raphael blocked her way, confusion and guilt stamped on his face. "Lara, please. We need to talk." "Rafa, what's going on?" Bruna's voice cut through the moment, her curiosity evident. Lara glanced at the woman next to Raphael, quickly assessing her. "Nothing of interest to your girlfriend," she replied coolly, before turning to Raphael. "I have work to do. Don't keep me any longer." And with that she left, leaving Raphael standing in the middle of the room, feeling as if the floor had been ripped out from under his feet. Bruna watched him, puzzled. Who was she? He hesitated, the words weighing on his tongue. "My ex-wife," he finally admitted. "And pregnant?" asked Bruna, arching her eyebrows. "She's pregnant with you." Raphael ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. I don't know. I need to find out." Raphael remained motionless for a few moments, staring at the door through which Lara had left. It was as if every word she said was a direct blow to his chest. He knew he couldn't just let it go. Lara was pregnant, something he hadn't even imagined. And, from the looks of it, she was facing everything alone. The guilt began to weigh heavier than the air in his lungs. "Rafa?" Bruna called out again, the impatience in her voice growing. "What was that all about? Why do you look like you've just seen a ghost?" He turned slowly towards her, his eyes still unfocused. "I need to sort this out. Can you stay here for a while?" Bruna crossed her arms, visibly annoyed. "Are you serious? I'm your girlfriend and we're here to spend time together, but you want to go running after your ex-wife? Bruna, please." Raphael's voice came out firmer than he expected. "I'll explain later, but now is not the time." Without waiting for an answer, he took the room key and left, ignoring Bruna's indignant call. He walked quickly through the luxurious corridors, his mind racing. His heart was beating so fast that he could almost hear the sound in his ears. Where would Lara be? Her cleaning trolley was no longer in the corridor. After a few minutes of frantic searching, he finally spotted her in the staff lounge, near a side entrance. She had her back to him, folding sheets with automatic gestures, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "Lara!" he called, approaching cautiously. She stopped, but didn't turn around. "Raphael, go away," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "I can't do that," he replied, taking a step closer. "We need to talk." Finally, she turned to face him. Her eyes were full of something he couldn't decipher. Anger, sadness, perhaps even a trace of hurt. "About what? About how you moved on so easily while I was left to deal with the consequences on my own? Or maybe you want to talk about how you disappeared without caring what was happening to me." Raphael swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. "I didn't know. Lara, I swear I didn't know you were pregnant." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course you didn't. How could I? You were too busy living your perfect life to notice anything that wasn't convenient for you." "That's not fair," he retorted, even though he knew she was right. "I know I made a mistake. I know I wasn't the man you needed. But if I'd known, if you'd told me—" "And what would you have done, Raphael?" she interrupted, her voice rising in pitch. "Would you have given up your career for me? Would you have stood by me for real or just made empty promises like always?" He opened his mouth to answer, but the words just wouldn't come. Lara shook her head as if confirming something she already knew. "That's what I thought. Lara, please." Raphael took another step, almost touching her arm, but stopped. "I know my actions in the past have been selfish, but I'm here now. I want to do the right thing. I want to help you." She stared at him, her eyes glistening with tears that she refused to let fall. "Do you want to help me?" Her voice was almost a whisper, but every word was an accusation. "Where were you when I lost sleep worrying about how I was going to support this child? Where were you when I had to take this job to survive? Where were you when I needed someone, Raphael?" He felt his stomach turn with each sentence. He had never thought about what Lara was going through, never considered that her choices had affected more than just him. "I was blind," he admitted, his voice low. "I was so focused on myself that I didn't see what I was missing. And now you think you can just show up and sort it all out?" She took a step back, crossing her arms over her stomach. "That's not how it works." Raphael ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "I know I can't fix the past, but can we at least try to find a way to move on? I want to be here for you, for the baby." "You have no idea what that means," she replied, shaking her head. "Being there isn't just showing up when it's convenient, Raphael. It's a commitment, it's sacrifice, and you've never been good at it." He felt his throat close up, but he didn't back down. "I can learn. Please, Lara, give me a chance to show that I've changed." She was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on his. He could see the internal battle going on inside her, the mixture of resentment and hope that seemed to be tearing her apart. Finally, she sighed deeply. "I'm not going to do this for you," she said. "If you want to help, do it for the child. But don't expect me to trust you, or for everything to go back to the way it was before. That's all I ask," he replied, feeling a thread of hope emerge from the darkness. Before she could reply, a manager appeared in the lobby, clearly confused to see them together. "Lara, are you all right? Do you need help with anything?" She quickly turned away from Raphael, returning to her professional posture. "No, I'm fine. I was just finishing something. Excuse me." Without looking at Raphael again, she hurried off, leaving him standing there, feeling small and crushed by the weight of his own failings. When Raphael returned to the suite, he found Bruna sitting on the edge of the bed, her face closed. "Well, it was fun waiting for you while you sorted out the problems with your ex." "Bruna, please." "It's not what you think," he began, but she raised her hand, interrupting him. "I don't know what to think, Raphael. All I know is that I'm not going to stand here and watch you worry more about her than about me." "I have to," he replied sincerely. "She's pregnant and needs help. That doesn't mean you don't matter." Bruna looked at him for a long moment before picking up her bag. "Maybe I should give you some time to figure out what you really want." She left, leaving Raphael alone in the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the sea view, but all he could see was Lara's gaze and the mountain of regrets he had to climb. The door to the suite closed with a muffled slam, leaving Raphael alone in the opulent space, which now seemed empty and oppressive. He threw himself into the armchair next to the window, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the sea seemed to merge with the grey sky. The cool, salty breeze coming in through the balcony couldn't ease the weight on his shoulders. Bruna was gone, and Raphael couldn't blame her. He knew she deserved something he couldn't offer at the moment, his undivided attention. But how could he give it to her or anyone else, knowing that Lara, pregnant, exhausted and clearly hurt, was dealing with so much on her own? He ran his hands over his face, trying to shake off the wave of guilt that was consuming him. But no matter what he did, the image of Lara with her tired face and protruding belly haunted him. How had he not known? How could he not realize that she needed him? And worse, how could he abandon everything so selfishly? The past came flooding back with painful clarity. He remembered when he first met Lara 8 years ago. She was bright, full of life, with dreams that seemed to infect him. He, an up-and-coming young businessman, was immediately captivated by her determination and kindness. She made him laugh when he needed it most, reminded him that there was more to life than contracts and numbers. But little by little, things changed. Raphael was a man obsessed with success, and Lara, who had initially supported his work, began to struggle to maintain the balance between marriage and her own happiness. He remembered every broken promise, every night she waited for him with dinner that went cold on the table, and above all, he remembered the moment when she looked him in the eye and said, "Raphael, I can't do this alone anymore." At the time, he had considered her dramatic. He thought that everything he did was for them, for the future they would build together. But now, looking back, he saw the void he had let grow between them like a chasm. He had chosen work, business, and let Lara fight for a marriage that no longer had two sides. And now she was pregnant, alone, working as a chambermaid to support herself and the baby. He should have been her support, but instead, he was just another ghost from the past, bringing pain and memories she'd rather forget. Meanwhile, in the small staff changing room, Lara sat on a worn wooden bench, trying to control her breathing. Her eyes were watery, but she refused to cry. Not now. Not for Raphael. She looked down at her trembling hands and inhaled deeply. Meeting him after so long in that context had been a blow she hadn't expected. To see the man she had loved, who had destroyed her heart with his indifference, now at the side of another woman, and clearly living a carefree life, it was almost unbearable. But what affected her most was the way he had reacted to seeing her pregnant. The genuine concern in Raphael's eyes had shaken something inside her, something she thought she had buried forever. But she remembered all the times she had had to face reality alone and let resentment fill the empty space. "You can do this," she murmured to herself, stroking her belly. "I can do it on my own. I don't need him." But deep down, a voice whispered an uncomfortable truth. Being alone was harder than she was willing to admit. Raphael stood up abruptly from the armchair, unable to continue drowning in regrets. He had to do something. He picked up his cell phone and typed in the name of the hotel manager, whom he knew from previous corporate events. When the manager answered, Raphael wasted no time. "I need to know where I can find the chambermaid who was in my suite earlier today. Her name is Lara." "Mr. Montero," replied the manager hesitantly. "I can't give out personal information about employees." "I understand," said Raphael, trying to sound calm, "but it's an emergency. Please just tell me where she lives or works the next shift." The manager hesitated, but eventually gave in. He knew how influential Raphael was, and what's more, his tone sounded sincere. Minutes later, Raphael was in the car, driving towards the address the manager had provided, a small apartment in a modest neighborhood, a far cry from the luxury he was used to. The contrast between the lives he and Lara were leading was stark, and he felt the weight of it with every kilometer he drove. When he arrived, he parked the car and stood for a few minutes, trying to gather his courage. He walked up the steps to Lara's apartment door and knocked softly. It took a few moments, but the door finally opened, revealing Lara with an exhausted and surprised expression. "What are you doing here, Raphael?" she asked without hiding her irritation. "I needed to see you," he replied, holding her gaze. "We need to talk, please." Lara hesitated but eventually stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The apartment was small but tidy. There were folded clothes in one corner and a bag of groceries on the table. He couldn't help but notice the signs of effort, the simplicity of things, the marks of tiredness on her face. "You shouldn't be here," said Lara, crossing her arms. "I've already said everything I need to say." "I know," Raphael replied. "But I can't just ignore it, not after today." She laughed bitterly. "Now you want to care? Where were you when I needed you, Raphael? Where were you when everything fell apart?" "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I made terrible choices, I know that. But I want to change. I want to be here for you and the baby." "And you think it's that simple?" Lara stared at him, her voice heavy with emotion. "Do you think you can just show up out of the blue, say you've changed, and expect me to trust you?" "I don't expect you to trust me," he said sincerely, "but I want to prove that I'm different, that I can be someone you can rely on." She shook her head, the tears finally flowing. "I don't know, Raphael. I don't know if I can believe you." He took a step forward, but didn't try to touch her. "Please, let me try. Not for both of us, but for the baby." Lara remained silent, the internal battle clearly evident on her face. Finally, she took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "Be that as it may, Raphael, it doesn't change what happened. You have a lot to prove. I know, he replied, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Raphael left Lara's small apartment feeling exhausted, as if he had fought an emotional battle that had consumed all his energy. The silence of the neighborhood streets only amplified the echoes of her words in his mind. You have a lot to prove. He knew he was right to insist on helping her, but her tone was a cruel reminder that the road to redemption would be long, tortuous, and full of uncertainties. When he reached the car, he sat behind the wheel and took a deep breath, his hands trembling as he gripped the steering wheel. For the first time, Raphael realized the true extent of the damage his choices had caused. Lara was right. It wasn't enough to show up now and want to be part of her and the baby's life. He needed to be more than that. Inside the apartment, Lara carefully closed the door and leaned against it, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The conversation with Raphael had touched her in ways she wasn't prepared to handle. I don't know if I can believe you. The words she had said still echoed in her head. As much as she tried to be firm, there was a part of her that desperately wanted him to be sincere, that his promise to change wasn't just another empty attempt to assuage his guilt. She stroked her belly, feeling the slight movement of the baby. He was the only reason she could go on, the only reason she could endure the long shifts at the hotel, the sleepless nights, and the constant worries. But the truth was that she was on the edge. Her body ached, and her mind was exhausted. There were moments in the silences of the early hours when she wondered what it would be like to share this burden with someone. Not just anyone, but Raphael. Don't be naive, she muttered to herself. She had learned the hard way that trusting him meant opening the door to more disappointments. And this time she couldn't afford to break down, not with a life depending on her. The next day, Raphael was in his office, but he could barely concentrate on the contracts and reports piling up on his desk. He picked up his cell phone several times, typed messages to Lara, and deleted them before sending them. He knew he needed to give her space, but the anxiety of proving he could change consumed him. Then something occurred to him. He opened his laptop and started researching support programs for single mothers, daycare centers near Lara's neighborhood, and services that could make her life easier. He knew she wouldn't accept help directly, so he needed to find a way to lighten her load without seeming like he was encroaching on her independence. Hours later, Raphael had a list of resources and ideas. There was a community center in her neighborhood that offered free newborn care classes, and he made a point of signing them both up. He also found a clinic that could perform prenatal exams free of charge for Lara. He hesitated for a moment, wondering whether to contact the place in his name or hers. In the end, he decided it would be better to leave the choice in her hands. That's a good start, he said to himself, trying to ignore the doubt that still lingered in his mind. 2 days later, Raphael returned to the hotel, this time determined to meet Lara again. He knew she probably wouldn't want to see him there, but he needed to show that he was committed. It was time to take a more concrete step. He found her in the staff corridor, arranging clean towels on a trolley. When she saw him, her expression immediately hardened. "Raphael," she began, without disguising the weariness in her voice, "what are you doing here?" "I brought you something," he said, pulling an envelope out of his pocket. He held out the paper to her, but Lara didn't take it. "What's this?" she asked, crossing her arms. "It's a list of resources," he explained hesitantly. "I've researched services that can help you with your pregnancy and baby. I'm not trying to invade your life, Lara. I just want to make things easier for you." She stared at him with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Services? What kind of services?" "Newborn care courses, free antenatal consultations, nurseries," he said quickly. "You don't have to use any of it, but I thought it might help." Lara finally took the envelope but didn't open it. "Why are you doing this, Raphael? To feel less guilty?" "No," he replied firmly. "I'm doing this because you deserve help. You've always been strong, but no one should have to carry everything alone." She shook her head as if fighting against his words. "You don't understand, Raphael. I can't trust you. Not after everything." "I know," he said, his voice soft, "but that won't stop me from trying." She sighed deeply, looking down at the envelope in her hands. "I can't promise anything," she finally said, "but, thank you." Raphael felt a wave of relief run through his body. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that evening, Lara sat down at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. She examined the list carefully, jotting down the details on a sheet of paper. Every service listed seemed useful, but the one that caught her eye the most was the newborn care course. She had always worried about her lack of experience and, although reluctant, she admitted to herself that she might consider the idea. She knew Raphael was trying, but it was still hard to trust. He seemed genuine, yes, but she couldn't forget all the times he had promised something and let her down. However, the seed of doubt began to sprout in her mind. What if he really was changing? Only time will tell, she thought aloud, stroking her belly. Across town, Raphael was sitting on the sofa in his apartment, going through old photos on his cell phone. He found one in particular that made him pause. It was of Lara holding a homemade cake she had made for his birthday. He remembered her smile, so genuine and full of love, and the way she looked at him as if he was the only thing that mattered. But he also remembered what happened after that photo. A work call ruined the evening, and he spent the rest of the time on the phone while Lara cleared the table in silence. It was one of many nights when he prioritized everything but her. He closed his eyes, the guilt weighing on him like a stone. He knew he couldn't change what he'd done, but he could do it differently now. For the first time he realized that it wasn't just about earning Lara's trust, it was about deserving it. Raphael felt like he was sailing in uncharted waters, fighting against the current of his own shortcomings. He knew that Lara needed time, but the anxiety of proving that he was different was eating him up inside. At the same time, there was something holding him back, as if every step he took was accompanied by the echo of his past choices. While he was in his apartment that night, the phone rang. He saw his mother's name on the display and hesitated before answering. They hadn't spoken for months. Her priorities had always revolved around work, and family had taken a back seat, a pattern he now recognized as a mistake. Raphael. Her voice came warm, but there was a tone of concern. "What's up? I haven't heard your voice for a while." "Yes, Mom," he replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "I'm just busy." "Are you really all right?" she insisted. "You look tired." He considered lying, but something in him gave in. "No, Mom, I'm not. In fact, I'm trying to fix something I messed up a long time ago." She was silent for a moment before answering. "Fix something? What happened?" Raphael told her everything, from his reunion with Lara to his attempt to make amends. He didn't know why he had opened up so much, but there was something liberating about saying those words out loud, admitting that he had failed and that he was trying to change. "You know that change takes time, don't you?" she asked softly. "Lara is hurt, and rightly so. But if you really want to be part of her and the baby's life, you need to be patient." "I know, Mom," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "But what if it's never enough? What if I can never prove to her that I've changed?" "Raphael, sometimes proving something doesn't mean getting immediate forgiveness. It means doing the right thing, even when no one seems to be looking. Are you willing to do that?" He didn't answer immediately, but he knew the answer. Yes, he was willing. Across town, Lara was at home, sitting at the kitchen table, looking at the list of services Raphael had given her. She still didn't know what to think about it all. It was a helpful gesture, of course, but it was also a reminder that he was trying to make amends for something that, to her, still seemed irreparable. She stroked her belly, feeling the baby move slightly. It was comforting, a reminder that despite everything, she wasn't completely alone. But even so, the thought of facing everything without support seemed overwhelming. She picked up the phone and dialed the number of her sister, Marina. The call was answered almost immediately. "Hi, Lara, how are you?" Marina asked, concern evident in her voice. "Tired," Lara replied, sighing. "But what's new, right?" "You shouldn't be burdening yourself so much," Marina said. "Have you thought about accepting a little help?" "Help from who?" Lara asked, her voice tinged with bitterness. "Raphael. He shows up now after all this time and expects me to believe that he's changed." "Has he?" Marina asked carefully. Lara was silent for a moment, her words echoing in her mind. She wanted to say no, that it was impossible for him to have changed so much in such a short time, but the truth was that Raphael was doing things she hadn't expected. He seemed genuine, and that scared her more than anything. "I don't know," she finally admitted, "but I can't trust him again, not after everything." "Maybe he's trying to be sincere," Marina suggested. "I know you're hurt, Lara, but maybe it's time to give him a chance to show you're different." "What if he isn't?" Lara asked, her voice trembling. "What if I open up to him and end up broken again?" "I can't do that, Marina. Not with the baby." "Only you can decide," Marina replied. "But sometimes forgiving isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight you're carrying." Lara hung up the call, feeling even more confused than before. In the days that followed, Raphael made a point of respecting Lara's space. He didn't look for her, but sent a short message. "I hope you're well. I'm here if you need me." Lara read the message several times, but never replied. However, as she continued with her exhausting routine at the hotel, Something inside her began to change. It was hard to admit, but she knew she couldn't face everything alone. She wanted to believe that Raphael was really changing, but the hurt was like an insurmountable barrier. Finally, one grey morning, Lara did something she never thought she would do. She sent Raphael a message. "Can we talk?" When Raphael received the message, his heart raced. He didn't know what to expect, but he knew it was a chance, perhaps the only chance he would have. He replied immediately, arranging to meet the next day at a cafe near her work. On the appointed day, he arrived early, sitting at a table in the corner trying to control his anxiety. When Lara walked in, he immediately noticed how tired she looked, but there was still something about her posture that exuded strength. She sat down in front of him, crossing her arms. "I'm here because I want to make a few things clear," she said bluntly. "Of course," he replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "If you really want to be part of the baby's life, you need to understand that this has nothing to do with me," she continued. "I don't know if I can trust you again, Raphael, but I don't want my son to grow up without a father." "I understand," he said, nodding slowly. "And I accept that. I just want to be there, in whatever way you allow me." She watched him for a long moment, trying to find some clue that he was lying, but she didn't. "Then start small," she finally said. "Help with practical things, but don't expect me to take you back so easily." "I don't expect it," he replied. "All I want is a chance." Over the next few days, Raphael began to participate actively, but carefully. He took Lara to doctor's appointments, helped with small tasks, and made a point of respecting the boundaries she set. Lara, although cautious, began to notice that there was something different about him. He was more present, more patient, and his actions spoke more than any words. One evening, as Raphael drove her home from an appointment, Lara finally broke the silence. "I still don't know if I can trust you, Raphael," she said, looking at the window. "I know," he replied, "and I'm going to keep trying, even if it takes the rest of my life." Lara didn't reply, but for the first time in a long time she felt that perhaps there was a possibility, small but real, that Raphael really was changing. She stroked her belly, feeling the baby move again. "Maybe," she thought, "some things deserve a second chance." Lara watched the fine rain beat against the window of her apartment as she stroked her belly, feeling the baby's slight movement. Raphael had been surprisingly consistent over the last few weeks. He showed up when he said he would, kept his promises, and respected the limits she set. This should have been enough to calm her heart, but instead, it made her more uneasy. She found herself thinking about the possibility that he was sincere, but the weight of the past made it impossible to trust him completely. Raphael had broken so many promises, so many times, that any gesture of his, no matter how genuine it seemed, made her question his intentions. That night she was especially tired. The work at the hotel had been exhausting, and the pain in her back was more intense than usual. Still, she tried to convince herself that everything was fine. It had always been like that. She dealt with things on her own without depending on anyone. The unexpected ring of the doorbell interrupted her thoughts. Lara frowned. She wasn't expecting visitors. She got up with an effort and went to the door. When she opened it, there he was, Raphael, looking worried and carrying a bag. "Raphael, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice heavy with fatigue. "I heard you had a hard day at work," he replied, showing her the bag. "I brought you something for dinner. I know you probably don't want to see me, but I thought it might help." Lara sighed, hesitating. Part of her wanted to send him away, to keep the distance she had been fighting so hard to preserve. But the other part, the one that was exhausted and lonely, wanted to believe that he might in fact be trying. "All right," she finally said, opening the door for him to enter. Raphael entered, not wanting to invade the space. He placed the bag on the table and began to take out the items. Hot soup, fresh bread, and a small packet of chocolate cookies. "I thought soup would be easier to digest," he explained, with a shy smile. Lara didn't reply immediately. She sat down at the table and watched as he served the soup. It was strange to see him there, so attentive, so different. "Why are you doing this, Raphael?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. He stopped what he was doing and stared at her. "Because I want to be here for you. I know I've failed before, but I'm trying to make amends." "You can't fix the past," she replied, her voice bitter. "No matter how many times you show up with soup or offer to help, some things just can't be undone." "I know," he said, lowering his eyes, "but I'm not here to fix the past. I'm here because I want to be part of the future. Yours, the baby's, in any way you allow." His words hung in the air, charged with emotion. Lara felt their weight, but also doubt. Was it possible to trust him again? Could he really have changed? As she ate her soup in silence, Raphael sat opposite her, respecting her space. He didn't push. He didn't ask questions she didn't want to answer. He was just there, present, something she couldn't remember seeing before. That night after he left, Lara lay in bed with thoughts swirling around in her mind. Raphael was trying, she knew that. But would it be enough? The next day, while she was at work, she began to feel something strange. It was a persistent pain that came and went, more intense than the pains she had been feeling for the last few weeks. Lara tried to ignore it, thinking it was just another pregnancy discomfort. But as the day progressed, the pains became more frequent and more intense. She was pushing a cleaning trolley down the corridor when a strong contraction made her stop. She held onto the wall, trying to catch her breath. A co-worker noticed her expression and approached her. "Lara, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she lied, forcing a smile. But deep down, she knew she wasn't. Something was wrong. The pain was becoming unbearable, and she began to feel a growing panic. She picked up the phone and, without thinking, dialed Raphael's number. He answered on the second ring. "Lara, is everything all right?" "Raphael," she said, her voice trembling. I think something's wrong. I need to go to the hospital." "I'm on my way," he said without hesitation. Raphael arrived at the hotel in less than 10 minutes. He found Lara sitting in the lobby, pale and visibly uncomfortable. He bent down beside her, taking her hand. "It's all right, Lara. I'm going to take you to the hospital. Just breathe, okay?" She nodded without the strength to argue. Raphael helped her into the car and drove as fast as he could, but carefully so as not to make her discomfort worse. With every contraction, he felt his heart squeeze. He wanted to do something to ease her pain, but he knew he could only be by her side and offer support. When they arrived at the hospital, Lara was quickly taken to triage. Raphael insisted on staying with her, even when the nurses suggested he wait outside. "I'll stay," he said, his voice firm. Lara looked at him, surprised by his determination, but at that moment she was so scared that she couldn't afford to refuse. The next few hours were a blur of pain, tests, and worry. The doctors explained that she was in premature labor, but they would do their best to stabilize the situation. Lara squeezed Raphael's hand tightly with every contraction, and he didn't complain, even when his fingers felt almost crushed. "You're doing fine," he said over and over again. "I'm here." Lara couldn't answer, but the look in her eyes said more than words. After a long period of tension and effort, a baby's cry echoed through the room. Lara let out a sigh of relief and exhaustion as the little one was placed in her arms. She looked at the tiny, perfect face and tears began to flow. "He's beautiful," murmured Raphael, watching the baby with an expression of admiration she had never seen before. Lara looked at him, seeing something different in his eyes. There was sincerity, love, and something she never thought she would see, genuine regret. "Raphael," she began, her voice weak, "I don't know if I can forgive you for everything that's happened." He nodded, holding her gaze. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Lara, but I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be the father our son deserves, and if you let me, the man you deserve too." She didn't answer, but something inside her began to give way, like a barrier that was slowly being dismantled. As the baby slept in her arms, Lara felt for the first time in a long time that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. The hospital room was silent, except for the sound of the baby's quiet breathing in the crib next to the bed. Lara stared at him, unable to look away. There was something almost hypnotic about watching the little chest rise and fall, the serene little face, still so young and full of possibilities. She was exhausted, but she couldn't sleep. The weight of everything that had happened in the last few hours was still on her shoulders. On the other side of the room, Raphael was sitting in a chair, leaning forward with his elbows resting on his knees. He was also watching the baby, his face full of emotion. Throughout the night, he had refused to leave Lara's side, even when the nurses suggested he rest. It was as if he feared that when he moved away, it would all come crashing down, like a dream from which he would be brutally ripped away. Lara knew she had to send him away. He had already done more than enough. He had helped her at the hospital, been by her side during childbirth, held her hand in the most difficult moments. But something stopped her from asking him to leave. There was something different about him, something she couldn't ignore. "You should rest," she finally said, breaking the silence. Her voice came out soft, almost a whisper. Raphael looked up at her, and Lara realized how exhausted he looked too. "I'm fine," he replied. but his expression betrayed his tiredness. "I'm not going anywhere." "Raphael," she insisted, more firmly this time. "You don't have to do that. I'm fine. The baby is fine. You can go home." He shook his head slowly, as if the idea were inconceivable. "I want to be here," he said, with a tone that left no room for argument. "I've wasted so much time, Lara. I won't waste any more." His words hit her like a wave. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She looked at him and saw something she hadn't expected, genuine regret. It wasn't just guilt or an attempt to make amends. It was a real weight, a painful awareness that he had made a mistake and was trying, however clumsily, to do something right. "You always knew what to say," she murmured, looking away from the baby. "The right words, the right promises. Only in the end it was never enough." Raphael took a deep breath, feeling the pain in her words, as if they were a direct blow. "I know," he replied, his voice almost breaking. "And I don't expect you to trust me. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm not going to give up, not this time." "Why?" she asked, her voice charged with emotion. "Why now, Raphael? After everything, after all this time, why are you here? What's changed?" He took a few seconds to answer, as if he was trying to find the right words, but deep down he knew the truth was simple. "Because I realized what I had lost," he said, his voice firm but full of pain. "I was so blind, so focused on work, on success, that I let everything that really mattered slip through my fingers. You, Lara, and now this baby. I can't change the past, but I can be here now. I can try to be different." Lara looked at him again, this time less harshly. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that he was sincere. But there was a part of her that still carried the wounds of the past, that was afraid of opening the door to him again and ending up hurt again. "I don't know if I can," she finally said, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I can trust you." "I know," he replied without hesitation, "and I'm not asking you to trust me now. I'm just asking you to let me try." Lara looked away again, fixating on the baby. She knew Raphael was right. As hard as it was to admit, she needed him, not for her, but for the baby. He deserved a father. "All right," she said, after a long silence. "But I don't want promises, Raphael. I don't want words. I want actions. If you want to be here, you have to prove it." "I will," he replied, the determination evident in his voice. "I'll prove it, Lara, every day, for as long as it takes." Over the next few days, Raphael kept his word. He was there for every moment, helping Lara take care of the baby, even if she insisted on doing most of it alone. He respected her boundaries, but he was also there when she needed him most, whether it was to hold the baby while she rested, or to bring groceries when he saw that the pantry was empty. But despite everything, there was constant tension between them. Lara still kept her barriers up, and Raphael knew he had to be patient. He understood that his presence there wasn't enough to erase the mistakes of the past. One evening, while Raphael was rocking the baby in the living room, Lara appeared in the doorway watching him in silence. He didn't immediately notice, lost in his own thoughts as he gazed at his son's serene face. When he finally looked up and saw her, a soft smile appeared on his lips. "He's calm," he said, almost in a whisper. Lara walked into the living room and sat down on the sofa, saying nothing. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, sharing a moment of peace. "You have a way with him," she finally said, her voice soft. Raphael smiled, looking at the baby again. "I'm still learning," he admitted, "but he makes it all worthwhile." Lara watched him for a moment, trying to understand the man sitting in front of her. He seemed different, calmer, more focused. But would that be enough? "Raphael," she began, hesitating, "I want to believe that you've changed, but it doesn't happen overnight." "I know," he replied, looking directly at her, "and I don't expect it to, but I'm still going to be here, Lara, even if you never fully believe me. I'll carry on for him. And for you." She felt her eyes fill with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Don't make promises you can't keep," she said, her voice trembling. "They're not promises," he replied. "They're commitments, and I'm going to keep them, every day, for the rest of my life." Lara looked away, the emotions inside her mixing. She wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. But there was still a long road ahead, and she didn't know if she was ready to walk it. As Raphael put the baby in the cradle and returned to the sofa, Lara looked at him again. For the first time, she saw a glimpse of the man he could be, the father he could be, and in that moment, she decided that perhaps it was worth taking a step forward, even if it was a small one. "Raphael," she said softly, Maybe there's a chance for you to prove that you're telling the truth, but you need to understand that it won't be easy. For me or for you. I understand, he replied, the sincerity evident in his eyes. And I'm ready for it. Lara nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and fear. Maybe there was hope after all, but for now she knew she would need time, and Raphael seemed willing to give her as much time as she needed. As the night wore on, they both remained silent, but there was something different in the air. It wasn't reconciliation or forgiveness, but something more subtle, the possibility of a future, built little by little, one day at a time. The following days were a mixture of tiredness, tension, and small silent victories. Raphael continued to make an effort, showing up every day at the time Lara allowed, helping with the baby and doing his chores without complaint. He made a point of respecting the boundaries she had set, even when it meant hearing short answers or feeling the heavy silence in the air while he was in her presence. Lara, on the other hand, kept to herself. Although she recognized that Raphael was making an effort, there was something in his way of interacting that still kept her on her toes. She couldn't help thinking that, at some point, he would give up. It wasn't the first time he had promised to change, but deep down she knew that something was different this time. He seemed more present, more aware of the impact of his actions, or lack of them. One evening, while Raphael was sitting on the living room floor putting together a small closet he had bought for the baby's room, Lara glanced over at him as he finished organizing a pile of children's clothes. He was so focused on his work that he didn't even notice her watching him. There was a calmness about him that didn't suit the man she had known before. "You've always hated these things," she said, breaking the silence. Raphael looked up, surprised that she had spoken. "I did," he admitted with a small smile. "But some things change, don't they?" Lara didn't answer immediately, but turned her attention to the clothes in her hands. "Yes, they do," she murmured, more to herself than to him. When the closet was finally assembled, Raphael stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. "It's ready," he said, a slight tone of pride in his voice. Lara approached, assessing the work. "It looks good," she admitted, almost begrudgingly. "It's a start," he replied with a cautious smile. As much as she tried to keep her distance, Lara couldn't help noticing that Raphael seemed genuinely different. He wasn't trying to impress her with grandiose gestures or using empty words to justify his actions. He just did what was necessary day after day. That same evening, while Lara fed the baby and Raphael washed the dishes in the kitchen, she found herself thinking about how her life had changed over the last few weeks. There was no denying that her load seemed a little lighter. Raphael was there, and despite everything, his presence made a difference. When he returned to the living room, she was sitting on the sofa, rocking the baby, who was beginning to doze off. Raphael sat in the armchair next to her, and for a moment they were silent, watching the little one. "You've been doing a good job," she said at last. He looked at her, surprised, but didn't try to hide the smile that formed on his lips. "Thank you," he replied, the sincerity in his voice evident. "But that doesn't mean everything is settled," she added quickly, as if to prevent him from getting too comfortable. "I know," he replied, "and I don't expect it to be. I'm here for whatever you need, for however long it takes." Lara looked away, fixating on the baby again. Despite his words, there was a small flame of hope growing inside her. Over the next few days, things continued to progress, albeit slowly. Raphael continued to be present, helping in any way he could without invading Lara's space. He even started attending a support group for fathers, something Lara discovered by chance when she saw a leaflet on his car seat. "Are you going to this?" she asked, holding up the paper. "Yes," he replied, without trying to hide it. "I thought it might help me better understand how to be a good father." Lara was silent for a moment, staring at the leaflet. She knew Raphael was trying, but it was still hard for her to completely believe that he wouldn't give up. "It's a good start," she finally said, handing the paper back to him. Raphael nodded, feeling a small wave of relief. Every gesture, every word, was a small step in the right direction. But despite the small victories, there were inevitable moments of tension. One afternoon, while Raphael was helping Lara organize some papers related to the baby, he found an envelope with documents from the hospital. When he opened it, he saw Lara's name listed as the sole legal guardian of the child. "You didn't put my name on it," he said, more of a statement than a question. Lara looked at him, hesitating. "I didn't know if you'd be around," she replied with painful honesty. Raphael felt his stomach turn. He knew he deserved it, but it was still hard to hear. "I understand," he said, after a long silence. "But I want to be part of his life, Lara. I want to be recognized as a father. That's something that will take time, Raphael, she replied, her voice firm. I need to make sure you're going to stay here, even when things get tough. I will, he said, with more conviction than ever. She didn't reply, but he saw something change in her gaze. It wasn't complete acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of an understanding. In the weeks that followed, Raphael continued to show his dedication. He was there for the good times and the difficult ones, learning how to look after the baby and finding ways to lighten Lara's load. One night, while Lara was in the bedroom putting the baby to sleep, Raphael was alone in the living room. He looked around the apartment, seeing the signs of a simple life but one full of effort and resilience. He picked up a photo of Lara and the baby from the table and stared at it for a long time. He knew there was still a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt he was on the right track. And more than that, he felt that he was willing to do whatever it took to prove that he deserved to be there. When Lara returned to the living room, she found Raphael still holding the photo. He put the frame back in place and looked at her with a soft smile. "You're amazing, you know that," he said, his voice full of emotion. Lara crossed her arms, surprised by his words. "Why?" she asked suspiciously. "Because you did it all by yourself," he replied, gesturing towards the apartment. "You took care of everything, even when I wasn't here. I don't know how you did it." "I had no choice," she replied, her voice softer than she had intended. "But even so," he said, taking a step towards her, "you're stronger than anyone I've ever met." Lara looked away, feeling her eyes fill with tears. She didn't want him to see her cry, but there was something in his words that touched her in a way she hadn't expected. "I only did what I needed to do," she said, trying to keep her composure. "And that's why I admire you," he replied. "That's why I want to be here. I want to be part of it, Lara, I really do." She finally looked at him, and for the first time let him see the tears in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but at that moment, Raphael knew he had taken another step towards regaining her trust. As night fell and the apartment became silent, they both felt something different in the air. It wasn't complete reconciliation, but it was a start, and for both of them, that was more than enough for now. Raphael knew that despite the progress, there was still a chasm between him and Lara that would not be crossed with words or well-meaning gestures alone. Every little interaction, every glance from her that seemed to vacillate between hope and hurt, reminded him of how he had failed before. Still, he kept going, not for himself, but for her and the baby. The weeks passed, and Raphael became a constant presence. He helped with the shopping, changed diapers, rocked the baby in the early hours, and even tried to learn about the signs of colic and other difficulties a newborn might face. Lara watched everything cautiously, as if waiting for the moment when it would just stop. But he didn't stop. One morning, while Raphael was rocking the baby in the living room, Lara called him from the kitchen. He came in, still holding the little one in his arms, and found her sitting at the table with a folder of documents. "I want you to sign this," she said, sliding a piece of paper towards him. Raphael took the paper and felt the weight of the words before he even read them. It was a paternity acknowledgement form. "I've been thinking," she began as he read the document. "If you're telling the truth, if you're really willing to be the father he deserves, then it needs to be official. I don't want him to grow up not knowing who his father is." Raphael looked up, surprised. "Are you sure about that?" "No," she answered honestly, "but I'm willing to take that step. Not for me, but for him." He looked at her, feeling a mixture of gratitude and pain. He signed the paper without hesitation, putting it back on the table. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "Don't thank me yet," she replied with a serious expression. "That doesn't mean I trust you completely. It means I'm willing to see how far you're willing to go." He nodded, understanding that this was as much a test as a step forward. Later, as Raphael put the baby to sleep, he reflected on what it meant. It wasn't just a legal recognition. It was a commitment he had to honor every day, and for the first time in his life he felt he was ready for something so important. But, as he had feared, things wouldn't be so simple. The following week, Lara was called to a meeting at the hotel. The manager informed her that due to budget cuts, they would need to reduce the team, and Lara was one of those affected. She returned home in shock, holding the letter of resignation as if it were a cruel reminder of how her life always seemed to be on the brink of collapse. Raphael arrived shortly afterwards and found her sitting on the sofa, her eyes fixed on a distant point. He knew, just by looking at her, that something was wrong. "What happened?" he asked, sitting down next to her. She handed over the letter without saying anything. He read it quickly and felt anger rise up inside him. "They can't do that," he said firmly. Yes, they can, replied Lara, her voice low and tired. And they did. Raphael held the letter for a moment before placing it on the table. Lara, we're going to sort this out. There's no we, Raphael, she replied, looking at him with an expression that mixed tiredness and despair. It's me. It's always been me. I don't expect you to understand. But I do understand, he said, his voice heavy with emotion. I understand what it's like to feel powerless, like the world is against you. But you're not alone now. I'm here. She stared at him for a long moment, as if assessing the sincerity of his words. Finally, she shook her head. I can't go on like this, she said, the tears finally flowing. I'm so tired, Raphael. So tired of fighting alone. Then let me fight for you, he replied, leaning forward. Let me help, Lara. Please. She didn't reply immediately, but for the first time she seemed to consider the possibility. In the days that followed, Raphael became even more present. He helped Lara review her finances, looked for nurseries that could accommodate the baby when she went back to work, and even spoke to old contacts to try to find her a position elsewhere. Lara, although hesitant, began to realize that he was really trying, but the tension between them remained. Despite everything he did, there were times when Lara retreated, as if the past was still a ghost she couldn't leave behind. One night, while the baby was sleeping, Lara finally confronted Raphael about something she had been holding in for weeks. Why haven't you given up yet? She asked, her voice low but full of emotion. Raphael looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? I mean, why are you still here? She continued. You could have moved on, Raphael. You could have continued living your life without looking back. So why are you trying so hard now? He was silent for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. Because I realized that, without you, my life means nothing, he finally answered. Because I realized that you and the baby are what really matter, and because I don't want to spend the rest of my life regretting what I didn't do. Lara looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but fear still held her back. I don't know if I can trust you, Raphael, she said, her voice trembling. Then don't, he replied, his voice firm. Just let me prove that you can. She didn't reply, but something inside her began to change. That night, while Lara slept, Raphael sat on the sofa, staring at the baby in the cradle. He knew he still had a long way to go, but he was willing to take it. For the first time, he felt that maybe, just maybe, he was on the right path to being the man he should always have been. Did you like the story? Leave your opinion in the comments. We'd love to know what you thought. Don't forget to like the video, to support us and subscribe to the channel. Until next time,